Today I want to give you a unique argument for the authenticity of the Gospels, showing that they are referring to real historical people rather than made-up fictional characters. Let's get into it. This argument is going to be called the argument from Artless Similarities. And an artless similarity refers to the casual consistency with which a character in the story is displayed across multiple Gospels or episode. The simplest explanation of such casual consistency is that the stories are referring to real historical people rather than fictional made-up characters. To show you how this argument works, we're going to get into a few examples, beginning with Mary and Martha in the Gospel of Luke chapter 10. In verses 38 through 42 it says, "Now as they were traveling along, he entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister called Mary, who was sitting at the Lord's feet, listening to his word. But Martha was distracted with all her preparations, and she came up to him and said, 'Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the serving alone? Then tell her to help me.' But the Lord answered and said to her, 'Martha, Martha, you are worried and bothered about so many things, but only one thing is necessary. For Mary has chosen the good part, which shall not be taken away from her.'" What we see here in Luke chapter 10 is a story of two sisters, Mary and Martha. Mary understands the importance of being with Jesus. She's sitting at his feet. She's listening to him. She's more contemplative. And then you have Martha, who's kind of missing the point of it. She's trying to be a good host and worried about all these pragmatic things, but she's missing being in the presence of Jesus, the Lord. Now, in order to see how this artless similarities arguments work, let's look at how these same two women are portrayed in John's Gospel. In John 11, verses 20, 21, 32, and 39, it says, "So then Martha, when she heard that Jesus was coming, went to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house. Martha then said to Jesus, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.' But when Mary came to the place where Jesus was, she saw him and fell at his feet, saying to him, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.'" And then in verse 39, after Jesus says to move the stone, Martha says, "Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he has been dead for 4 days." So now we see in John's Gospel the same two women, Mary and Martha. They're being described in two completely different contexts and completely different stories, and yet they have the same idiosyncratic personalities and they're portrayed in very similar ways. The simplest explanation of this is that these stories are referring to two historical women named Mary and Martha rather than contrived characters made by design. In Luke's Gospel, Martha is portrayed as someone trying to be a good host. She's trying to take care of the dishes and the food, and she's trying to make sure that Jesus feels taken care of, all the while missing the entire point of being with Jesus. And again, when we go to John chapter 11, we see Martha trying to be a good host. She rushes out to meet Jesus while Mary stays behind, and she's the one that greets him first. And then when Jesus goes to roll away the tomb, she's worried about the stench, again missing the point that Jesus wants to raise their brother from the dead. And then we have Mary, the more contemplative one. In Luke's Gospel, she's sitting at his feet. She's not worried about all the pragmatic concerns of taking care of the home. She just wants to be with Jesus. And in John chapter 11, we see Mary not trying to be a good host. She doesn't rush out like Martha does. But when she does finally come out, she once again falls at the feet of Jesus, recognizing whose presence she is in. All right, now that we have our first artless similarity in the books, let's go to our second example, which is going to be how Jesus teaches about healing on the Sabbath. In Matthew chapter 12, verses 9 through 13, it says, "Departing from there, he went into their synagogue, and a man was there whose hand was withered. And they questioned Jesus, asking, 'Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?' so that they might bring charges against him. But he said to them, 'What man is there among you who has a sheep, and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath? He will not take hold of it and lift it out. How much more valuable then is a person than a sheep? So then, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath.' Then he said to the man, 'Stretch out your hand.' He stretched it out, and it was restored to normal, like the other." So first, we see Jesus being questioned about whether it's lawful to heal on the Sabbath. Then Jesus uses a metaphor in reference to taking care of an animal, and then he says it's good to heal on the Sabbath or to do good on the Sabbath, and then he ends up healing the man. In Luke chapter 13, we see something very similar. Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. There was a woman who for 18 years had a sickness caused by a spirit, and she was bent over double and could not straighten up at all. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are freed from your sickness." And he laid hands on her, and immediately she stood up straight again. and began glorifying God. But the synagogue leader, indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, began saying to the crowd in response, "There are 6 days during which work should be done. So come during them and get healed, not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites, does each of you on the Sabbath not untie his ox or donkey from the stall and lead it away to water it? And this woman, a daughter of Abraham, as she is, whom Satan has bound for 18 years, she not have been released from this restraint on the Sabbath day?" So we see in 2 completely different contexts and Gospels, Jesus being met with a similar challenge about healing on the Sabbath. And we see the same pattern of response both times, showing that this is most likely how Jesus responded to such a challenge in history. It is much less likely that Matthew and Luke made these stories up out of the contrivance of their imagination. It's a much better explanation to say that this is the pattern of Jesus' response when he was met with this challenge about healing on the Sabbath. And we have one more example of artless similarities that we're going to get into today, which involves Peter's impulsiveness across all 4 Gospels. And for this example of an artless similarity, I'm going to use stories that are unique to each Gospel. So the story that I'm using in Mark is only found in Mark. The story I'm using in Matthew is only found in Matthew, and so on. In Mark chapter 9, verse 6, during the Transfiguration, Peter says to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good that we're here. Let's make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." And it says that he said this because he didn't know what to say. In Matthew 14:28, when Jesus is walking on water, Peter impulsively asks Jesus, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." In Luke 5:8, after Jesus had miraculously allowed Peter to catch a multitude of fish after fishing all night and catching nothing, Peter falls at Jesus' feet and exclaims, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." And finally, in John 21:7, after the resurrection, Jesus shows himself to the disciples while they're fishing, and Peter is described as throwing himself into the sea in order to see him. So Peter, across all 4 Gospels and in a multitude of episodes, appears to be an impulsive and passionate man. The simplest explanation is that this is how Peter really was in history, rather than a contrivance of 4 independent authors. So hopefully by now the point is clear. Artless similarities seek to demonstrate that the Gospel authors are referring to real historical people. This is not the result of the Gospel authors passing on mythologized legends, but rather what they're trying to do is share the experiences of real human beings that experienced the person of Jesus. To end the video, I have a syllogism that will hopefully make the point as clear as possible. Artless similarities are best explained by chance, design, or accurate historical reportage. Artless similarities are not best explained by chance or design. Therefore, artless similarities are best explained by accurate historical reportage. Thank you so much for watching this video on the argument from artless similarities in the Gospels. I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you believe that the Gospels are referring to real historical people and are not simply passing on mythologized legends. Give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and you want more content like this. This has been The Epitome. I'm your host, Nathan Bozeman. We'll see you around.